Today we will be discussing UPSC optional geography, and today we will be continuing with oceanography, and our topic today is coral reefs. Hello and welcome to my channel Geography Made Easy, and in these videos we try to make difficult geographical topics easy. And in today's video we are going to talk about the different facets or fascinating facts about coral reefs, their importance and how they are being harmed in the current situation. Let us look at the definition of a coral reef. So a coral reef is a underwater ecosystem. So we have to first understand that it is an ecosystem where we see both the biotic and the abiotic factors which are present in this ecosystem. If you want to know more details about ecosystems and its importance, you can look into my particular chapter, and I will share the link in the description. So it is an ecosystem formed by a particular kind of organisms, and these organisms are called coral polyps. Now these coral polyps are small microorganisms who live together, and their exoskeleton forms the coral as we know them. So it is important or interesting to understand that the skeleton which we see is not inside the body of the organism, rather it is outside the body. So it is forming an exoskeleton. And together these different colonies of corals, they together form a huge area which is called the coral reef, or they form the coral islands with reef-like structures. Now, their importance lies in the fact that different kinds of biodiversities are living in the coral reefs. So, we have a number of marine species, including different fish, mollusks. So, the coral reefs are seen in warmer waters. So, different kinds of plants and animal species are seen feeding and living in the coral reefs. Hence, they form a very high biodiversity region, and this is why it is very, very important. And these ecosystems provide a lot of essential ecosystem services, such as protecting coastlines from erosion, supporting fishermen because different kinds of fish are seen in these shallow seas, and contributing to tourism and recreation. So they are very, very important, and also because of biodiversity, which we cannot ignore. Different kinds, not only humans but also the other animals and plants, require the coral reefs for their survival. So it is a very important component in the marine ecosystem. Moving on, if we want to look or understand about the coral polyp, this is the diagram of the coral polyp, or the structure of the coral polyp. And these are these organisms which has these tentacles, and these tentacles, it is swaying in the sea water. They catch very tiny floating microorganisms and they feed on it. So these are the different structures. So this is the mouth through which the organism feeds. So this is how it functions, and it forms a calcium carbonate deposit, and it then becomes the which is the skeletal part of the reef, and it builds on. So colonies over colonies, it keeps building on and forming the coral reef. So what are the different conditions for the growth of coral? This is very, very important, because if any of this one of the factors is not met, corals will be destroyed or corals will not grow. So the first and the most important factor here is warm water. Warm seas and oceans are required. Shallow seas, so mostly we are associating ourselves with a sea. So the temperature should be between 23 degree to 29 degrees Celsius, as that is the dependency rate. In the warm sea, they can survive where there is photosynthesis. So the sea is warm, and also it needs to be shallow, because otherwise photosynthesis will not happen. So deep sea does not have coral reefs. Next is sunlight and clear water. Another very important part here is the clear water, because we know that the Bay of Bengal is not a very deep sea, it is shallower, but we do not see coral reefs along the coasts of, say, West Bengal or Odisha or the other states of even the countries such as Bangladesh. This is because you require clear water, so there has to be no sediments. And we know that the Bay of Bengal, a huge amount of sediments enter the Bay of Bengal through the Gangetic, the entire sediment of the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, as well as the different rivers flowing from the Deccan Plateau, they bring in a huge amount of sediment into the coral, into the ocean. So coral cannot survive in that case because the sediment blocks the coral polyps, the polyp which has the tentacles. The tentacles, if they get blocked by sediments, they will not be able to do photosynthesis, hence they cannot survive. So and sunlight is required, so we require all the conditions. So of course we understand that corals are special. And salinity and nutrients, corals require a specific balance of seawater and nutrients for growth. So if it is too salty, too saline, there will be no growth, and if it is too less saline also, there will be no growth. And with optimal conditions found in oligotrophic, which means nutrient poor waters. So too much amount of nutrients are also not required in the water. So coral reefs are usually not seen too close to land surfaces. Mostly they are seen along islands. So in India we have the Lakshadweep Island, and in some parts of Andaman and Nicobar Islands we do see coral reefs, but along the coastal regions we do not see coral reefs. Only very close to the tip of the Indian subcontinent, we do see some coral reefs, but most of the coral reefs have got bleached and they have died in that area. So between Sri Lanka and India, we do see some coral reefs. There are evidences. Moving on, what are the different types of coral reefs? There are basically three types of coral reefs. One is the fringing reef, which is found on the fringe of a landmass. So if we have a particular land, in this case there is an island, so it will grow along the edge of the land. Then we have the barrier reef. These are very thick accumulations of coral reefs where we see that their depth is much more greater than a fringing reef. So we have the Great Barrier Reef, which is one of the perfect examples, and we can see the photograph. And then finally we have the atoll. Now this is the photograph showing how an atoll is formed. So if we have a volcanic island, and then suppose in this volcanic island there is an eruption. After the eruption, what happens? This landmass, because the magma flows out, this landmass will collapse. And we will see that after the collapse, it can happen either way. Either it can collapse or it can just get eroded away. So there can be erosion or there can be collapse after there is a eruption. So we see something called a caldera lake getting formed. So if it is an island, this caldera will not form a lake. We see in the land areas this forms a caldera lake, where or a crater lake. So the crater gets filled up with water from the wind, and it forms the caldera lake. But in this case we see that that does not happen, but rather the sea water enters the middle of the island, and the fringing reefs which were at the side of the particular island, they remain as something which is called the atoll. And this is a very good example of an atoll. We can see that this part has got collapsed. This is a deeper part, and we see that this coral reef is like the fringing a part or the shallow part which is remaining, and this kind of feature is called an atoll. And a number of atolls can be seen in different parts of the world, including the Pacific Ocean, and some parts mostly in Pacific Ocean we see atolls in different areas, and in some parts of Atlantic Ocean as well. So we can classify coral reefs according to their different types. So we have basically two types of coral reefs: the ones which are living, which we see in the tropical areas, which are called the tropical coral reefs, and the marginal belt coral reefs, which were once living coral reefs, but now they are no more living coral reefs. Rather, they have died, and only we can see that they exist as old coral reefs as evidence that the water was warm and the sea had conducive temperature and other conditions for growth of corals. But we will focus on the tropical coral reefs because at this moment it is important to preserve and save and protect them. So we have some of the biggest coral reefs is the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and followed by this we have some other very famous coral reefs such as the one in Belize in Central America, in near Hawaii, in Red Sea, and in other tropical oceans and seas as well. So in India also we have coral reefs along the Lakshadweep Islands. We have coral reefs in some parts of Andaman and Nicobar Islands as well. Now, what are the threats which are faced by coral reefs? This is very important because this part is something which we have to understand. So, a lot of the factors are actually affecting coral reef formation and they're leading to the death of coral reefs. Let us look at each factor one by one. The first and the most important is climate change. With the warming of the ocean, now temperature, if it becomes too hot or too cold, coral reefs will die. So, both with warming and cooling of ocean waters we can see death of corals. So climate change does affect coral reefs. Then we have overfishing, the way in which fishing is done, sometimes using explosives to blow up the different the coral reefs we can see, or overfishing like if you are using trawlers and nets, so they can also lead to uh, destruction of coral reefs. The third point is pollution, and here by pollution we mean marine pollution. So we can have plastic pollution, we can have all the different kinds of chemicals which are being put into the ocean and sea. So everything which we produce, some of it goes into the land and the rest is thrown into the sea. So that affects the coral reefs because the corals cannot survive in polluted water. Acidification of seawater, this is another impact of both climate change, both pollution, where we see seawaters are becoming acidic in nature, and this is leading to coral reef death. Loss of biodiversity, that is again we see that coral reefs are destroyed and we see that biodiversity loss is happening, and this is also detrimental to the growth of coral reefs. Commercialization, that is we are using corals for different commercial purposes, we are selling it and for jewelry, for other purposes also, medicinal properties, etc., for ornamentation, for putting them in the aquariums, anything, and that can also lead to a loss or threat to the coral reefs. Next we have coral bleaching, and we will look into this in details in the next slide. And finally, tourism activities such as scuba diving and snorkeling, if it is not done properly, coral gets damaged, and once coral gets damaged we can see that it leads to the death of entire colonies of corals. So what is coral bleaching? So coral bleaching happens when corals they lose their vibrant colors and they become white. So this is happening due to mostly climate change, and one particular microscopic algae which is called the zooxanthelia. This zooxanthelia lives inside the coral, and it is helpful. So we see a symbiotic relationships existing within the corals where the polyps and different other microorganisms are helping each other to do photosynthesis. So it is forming its own kind of ecosystem within the particular coral polyp. So the zooxanthelia, they live within the corals, and what happens is when oceans become too hot, they throw out this particular algae. So this is an algae, this is a plant, this zooxanthelia, and zooxanthelia, once it is expelled from the algae, it doesn't return to the algae, and so with time we see that the color gets bleached and it becomes white and finally it dies. So temperature increase, climate change leads to the expulsion of the organism algae, and then finally that leads to the coral losing its color because it adds color to the corals, and finally also it kind of dies because it slowly stops functioning because it cannot do the symbiotic functioning, the photosynthesis, because this coral is an organism, it uses the plants to survive as well, the algae which live within it. So the different microorganisms are dependent on one another. So climate change is adversely affecting that, and it is leading to coral bleaching. Finally, we will look at how we can protect coral reefs. This is important because this is the way by certain ways by which we can conserve this natural resource, and biodiversity hotspots can be saved. So one is the fishing regulations. They need to be made more stronger. Different countries need to understand that this is something which is important. So yes, there has been a lot of different kinds of talk on this, but fishing regulations need to be made more stringent. It needs to be made more regulations need to be done. Next is control of all pollution. Yes, you have to understand where you have coral reefs, and you have to make sure that pollution can be controlled. We have to do more here. Monitoring tourism in fragile ecosystem. So next, when you are visiting any island, you make sure that you are not harming, your tourism activity is not harming the fragile ecosystem, be it Andaman Nicobar Islands, be it Maldives, be it Lakshadweep. We need to also, this tourism needs to be monitored by the government or any other body, so that the tourism's there is no amount of like activities such as snorkeling, etc. There needs to be, it has to be done in a more educated fashion. People need to be made aware about how to go and do these things, and most of the cases we see that the tourists go and harm the corals. And finally, monitoring and restoration. This is being constantly done. The temperature of the ocean water is monitored. The coral reefs are being monitored, because a huge part of different parts of coral reefs have been dying since the 1950s. With the rising temperatures and with acidification of seas, this is constantly happening. In fact, 50% of the different corals have already, in the tropical ocean seas, they have already died. So managing stream flow, that is the amount of sediment which is entering the ocean, that needs to be monitored. And uh, restoring corals through coral nurseries. And this is one photograph of a coral nursery where coral colonies can be built, they can be nurtured in the nurseries and then planted back into the ocean. So this is also something which is being actively done, and we hope that this can mitigate. But again, there has to be more different kinds of more activities need to be done, so that we understand the importance of coral reefs, and we somehow we are able to control climate change and other activities which adversely affect the climate. So if you have any doubts and questions, please write in the comment section, and please feel free to subscribe to my channel, and like and share it with your friends if you find it helpful. So see you in the next video.